All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. So again, thanks for joining me today. My name's Kevin Hancock, Director of Solutions here at Exostar. And today we're going to talk about creating comprehensive system security plan for NIST and CMMC compliance. Before I jump into the main presentation, just want to cover a few housekeeping details. So today's webinar is scheduled to last 45 minutes to an hour. That does include Q&A. Now, you'll be muted during today's presentation. However, I do have a colleague on the line with me who can answer your questions over chat. If for some reason we do have an outage today, just wait for a minute and try to reconnect. You can either refresh your browser or use that same link that you utilized to get into today's webinar to come back into the session. If at any time you'd like to speak with one of our certification assistant experts, or if you have any additional questions, you can reach out to us a couple of different ways. You can email us at cmmc-team@exostar.com. Or you can come to the Exostar website, www.exostar.com. There's a chat feature there on every page. And if you have questions, we'd be more than happy to answer them via that channel as well. Now, if one of the questions you have is, will I be receiving today's presentation? The answer is yes. You will receive a follow-up email from today with the presentation as well as a link to the recording if you want to review anything that we've covered. So with that, let me dive into the presentation. So this is the agenda we're going to cover. And as you see, the first thing I'm going to cover is really where we are in the current CMMC ruling cycle, for lack of a better word. So what we've been waiting for is the implementation of the CMMC rules into the Code of Federal Regulations, the CFR. Now, that has started to take place. The first rule went into effect on 12/16/2024. This is 32 CFR. This rule established the CMMC program. It puts in place all of the various bits and pieces, the assessment guides, the terminology, the cyber AB to accreditate agencies and all those kinds of things. So it puts the program in place. Now, the one thing we're still waiting for is the 48 CFR. This is the actual acquisition rule that would put CMMC language into DoD contracts. That's still in the process. So when people, as you start to talk about CMMC and when it's going to take effect, that's the one final piece that we're waiting to be implemented. And once that goes into effect, 60 days after that publication date, we'll start to see CMMC language start to appear in DoD contracts. Now, the main difference between what we do today around controlled unclassified information and moving to CMMC is that it moves us away from a self-attestation model where we had contractual language that said, hey, if I receive controlled unclassified information or federal contract information, etc., I need to protect it in a particular way, and I self-attest that I do those things. We're moving away from that to a third-party assessment model, where if you do receive controlled unclassified information and or above, you'll need a third party to assess that you actually do the NIST 800-171 controls. It also did further define some key terms and the requirements around those different kinds of solutions. One of those was for cloud service providers. Many folks use a cloud service provider as part of their overall CMMC enclave, if you will, or things that help them secure and process controlled unclassified information. If you're utilizing something from a cloud service provider, that cloud service provider must be FedRAMP moderate or FedRAMP moderate equivalent. If you're utilizing an external service provider, and these are typically, most people think of these as your managed service providers or your managed service security service providers, MSPs or MSSPs. If you are utilizing one of those, folks that are working with you to provide CMMC services are going to be assessed as part of your organization. Now, whether or not you require your contractors to also be CMMC, level 1, 2, or 3 is kind of up to you, but those will be one of the things you'll want to ask your service providers to determine whether or not they meet those requirements. Now, CMMC breaks it down into 3 different levels. And this corresponds with the kind of information you're going to receive as part of your contract fulfillment. Now, the majority of you are going to be level 1. Level 1 means that you only receive federal contract information, or FCI. In those cases, you're going to need to meet the 15 requirements, which are aligned with the Federal Acquisition Regulation 52.204.21. You'll need to do an annual self-assessment and an annual affirmation that you meet those requirements. If you receive controlled unclassified information, you're going to be at a minimum of level 2. Level 2 means that you protect that information in accordance with NIST 800-171-R2. Now, there is a NIST 800-171-R3 available today. However, an R stands for revision. Currently, DoD is requiring you to just meet revision 2. There are 2 levels of level 2. One is a self-assessment, and one is that certified third-party assessment. Now, only a small portion of organizations, less than 2%, will be able to do the self-assessment and the annual affirmation. Those are going to be determined by the contracting officer when they let the contract. So it won't be something that you can request. It won't be something that you can ask about if you're subcontracting to a particular contract. These are going to be put down by the Department of Defense from the time they put a contract out for bid. In those places, it'll spell out what CMMC level you need to meet. And obviously, as one of those, there'll be a level 2 self-assessment or a level 2 certified assessment. And then a small number of organizations out there will require a higher level of security because you receive a higher, not quality, but a higher level of controlled unclassified information. And those are organizations which will be determined at CMMC level 3. And you've got those 110 NIST 800-171 requirements, as well as 24 from NIST 800-172. Now, when CMMC is implemented, it is going to be implemented in a phased approach. I grabbed this straight from the DoD's website. This chart, this link will take you there if you want to get more information about this. But those phases are, as you see, laid out here. In phase 1, after that CFR 48 goes into effect, or 60 days after that, we're going to be at that initial phase. And that's going to be the solicitations for level 1 or 2 and or level 2 are going to still require just a self-assessment. After that initial 12-month period, right, this gives everyone a chance to ensure that if they're bidding on those contracts, they get that third-party assessment organization to complete their assessment, make sure they're validated. That's when level 2 certifications will start to require that certified third-party assessment organization to have you validated. Phase 3, 2 years after the start of phase 1, that's when you'll start to see that requirement around level 3 certification. And level 3 certification is actually done by DIBCAC. It's not done by a C3PAO, it's actually done by the Department of Defense itself, and the organization within it that does that is DIBCAC. And then after 36 months, right, the full plan will be in effect. You'll have the 3 levels spelled out. You'll start to see contracts, always require that particular self-assessment or certified third-party assessment, and at what particular level. Now, I will say that DoD does have the caveat on their website that, as you see here, that in some procurements, they may implement a CMMC requirement in advance of the planned phase. So if it's a particularly critical program, they may require that level 2 certified third-party assessment done prior to that, that initial phase. It might happen in phase 1 rather than phase 2. And DoD will spell that out as part of the contract language when that contract is put out for bid. Now, as I talked about before, CMMC is really not really changing things. It's requiring that certified third-party assessment, but we've been required to protect controlled unclassified information in accordance with NIST 800-171 for quite a while now. So your current DFARS contracts or the subcontracts you've signed also contain DFARS clauses. And if they contain clauses around controlled unclassified information, and those are the clauses you see here on the slide, the 7012, the 7019, 7020, etc., those clauses required you to protect controlled unclassified information in accordance with NIST 800-171. That started with 7012 way back in 2013, I believe. What then occurred, and what you may have in your contracts today, is the introduction of the 7019 clause. 7019 clause required you to do a self-assessment, or requires you to do a self-assessment of your implementation of those NIST 800-171 controls. As part of that self-assessment, there is an assessment guide provided that shows you how you score yourself on that NIST 800-171 assessment. It then asks you to go into the SPRS system using your cage code provided to you by the Department of Defense. You enter in that SPRS, that score that was generated, into the SPRS system. The DoD are the only ones who have access to that system, and they utilize this to look at supplier performance risk. Now, your compliance with cybersecurity requirements are one factor of the risk, so that SPRS score is one thing that goes into your overall SPRS score, and then the DoD considers this when they're awarding contracts. So even though you may be getting ready for CMMC, I would make sure that you are current in your contractual obligations today. So I'm now going to kind of cover how you basically go through that self-assessment process. Because not only will this help you understand what you need to do as part of that self-assessment, but it'll also point you to all the information you need to gather to build out that system security plan. Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to be evaluated when you both determine that score you need to enter into the SPRS system if you're trying to satisfy a current requirement. It'll also be what you need to consider when you're engaging with that certified third-party assessment organization, when you need to determine whether or not you're ready to engage with that organization. So the first thing you should take a look at is the data flow of controlled unclassified information into, throughout, and outside your organization. So how are you getting controlled unclassified information from either the Department of Defense or other organizations that you're engaging with as part of this contractual obligation you have? Where do you store that information? And then not only where do you store it, but how do you back it up? What kind of disaster recovery systems are in place? What individuals in your organization or roles in your organization interact with that, including those support and IT functions that may be part of your backup service or your support service or those kinds of things. Are those your employees, or are those MSPs or MSSPs that you've also engaged with to help you manage your overall system? How do they use that data? And at the end of the day, what you're looking for is, where is this information stored, processed, or transmitted? And all the people that go into that overall system, including whether or not some of these things are actual physical drawings, physical documents, those kinds of things. It may be, we often think about this as an IT function, but in many cases it doesn't have to be. In some cases, you've got hard drawings and printouts and things like that you've also got to physically secure. And part of an overall system security plan is the physical security of your building, your systems, et cetera. So all those things go into that data flow. That helps you determine the scope of your overall system, because that scope is going to inform both yourself as well as that third-party assessment organization that you engage with, because they're going to take a look at your system security plan, and they're going to take a look at that system diagram and boundary that you create. And as part of that creation, you're going to need to be able to define, okay, where do I store, process, or transmit CUI? Those are my CUI assets. How am I protecting those assets? And sometimes those things don't store, process, or transmit. They're just there to protect the information, right? These can be firewalls. They can be physical file cabinets. They can be a locked door, things like that. So those kinds of things are also part of your overall system diagram. This is where you also want to consider those contractor risk managed assets. Do you have a group augmenting your IT or acting out or acting for you as an outsourced IT organization? They may be the ones who set your firewalls, who manage your firewalls, who look at your backup systems, who have configured your Microsoft Azure subscriptions, things like that. And so they may actually have access to some of that information. And so you've got to account for those as well. There are specialized assets, tools and die machines, cutting machines, printers, et cetera, that might be might be within the boundary and need to be accounted for, but don't necessarily have operating systems. They don't necessarily store information. You just may enter information one time, use it, and then move on, and there's no memory or anything like that in those systems. These are often those IoT type devices as well. And then you may have other systems that, though they may reside, within or outside these boundaries, or they may be part of your overall organization, but they're not part of the overall CUI data flow. And you need to be able to define and control that and make sure that you can define that system boundary. Because if not, then when you engage with that third-party assessment organization, they're going to look at everything in your organization, and you may want them just to actually focus on, maybe those 10 or 12 people in your organization that are actually part of the CUI data flow and the systems that they use to protect that. Now, when we talk about NIST 800-171, we're talking about 110 controls across 14 different categories. And these controls, right, they're not evenly spread across these 14 categories. Some have 2, some have 5, etc. And these are weighted differently based on that overall assessment guide when you kind of do that self-assessment. So when you start to take a look at what you need to do and where you may need to focus, it's often a good idea to look at that overall scoring system, because obviously you'll get more benefit focusing on the 5-point values versus the 3-point values, et cetera. And we're going to cover that in just a minute. So what you're going to need to do is go through each of those 110 controls and determine whether or not you've implemented that particular control. And to do that, you're going to use the assessment guide. This is a page, if you will, screenshotted directly from that assessment guide. And this is what those assessors are going to take a look at when they come on site. So this particular requirement, right, control the flow of CUI in accordance with approved authorizations. These determine if statements are what you should have in place to meet this particular requirement, right? So you should, have the information flow control policies defined in your organization. What are your enforcement mechanisms for controlling that? Where are those designated sources and destinations? How do you authorize those people to actually have authorizations into those different systems and things like that? So all of those need to be part of your policies and procedures of how you've implemented this. You're also going to need evidence that you actually do the things that you say you do. Hopefully logs. If you're doing a training session, you want the sign-in sheets and who passed, or if you're using an LMS system, a printout of who's actually gone through the training for that particular year or that particular time period. You'll also want to make sure you train the individuals. If you've got that, hey, our IT organization approves access to this system, it goes through our ticketing system, or an email is sent in, you should be able to, the individuals that are part of that flow should also be trained on that. So if the assessor asks them, hey, what do you do around this when somebody requests access to this particular file share, or they need a key to the file cabinet to get in? How do you approve that? And they should be able to walk through your process and show them what's done. And then obviously you should have a process to periodically test and review that these systems still work. They don't need any changes. We haven't updated any technology, etc. You're then going to go through using the assessment guide. If you've implemented a control in its totality, so you've met all of those determine if statements, I do those things, I've gathered the evidence, etc., and I've got that information available to show to my third party, then you score yourself based on what control it is, a 1, a 3, or a 5. Or it's a -1, -3, or -5. So your overall score is going to range somewhere between a -203 to 110. If you don't have a control implemented, then you create a POAM, a plan of action and milestones, to close that item. And when you're doing this, the guidelines say that all POAMs must be closed within 180 days. Now, if you're doing a self-assessment, that gives you the guideline to say, hey, if I know I haven't implemented a control, I've got 180 days to go ahead and get that in place. Now, if a third-party assessment organization is on site and they find out that you haven't implemented a particular control, that's when that one where it says POAMs only allowed for what controls worth 1 point. Like if you're doing the self-assessment, you can create a POAM against any controls. But if that third-party assessment organization is on site and they're doing it, they're going to be able to continue their assessment if it's an allowed 1 point control. And they'll be able to complete their assessment and they'll be able to give you a conditional pass, if you will. And you'll have 180 days to close that. We'll cover, what you're going to do around that as well. Now, these are those different controls and those different point values. So you've got those 5-point controls and those 3-point controls. These are spelled out in the DoD assessment methodology, and this is a link to that document. And it shows you, what those different controls are worth. Now, this goes back to that statement I made previously. When the assessor is on site, when you engage with that third-party assessment organization, they're on site. If they find if they find a 1-point control that you haven't yet implemented, or it's not done correctly, or they're not going to give you a pass on it, as I mentioned before, that's usually okay, except for these particular controls. With these particular controls, you must have in place and implemented before you engage with that C3PAO organization. So just to make sure, and this goes back into that, you don't want to engage that C3PAO until you've done a self-assessment and you know that you have all these controls implemented. If they come on site, they find some problems. If it's one of these controls as well as the 3 or the 5-point, then you're not going to be able to pass. They're going to cease their assessment. You're going to have to re-engage with them at a later date. If it is those other 1-point controls, right, then you've got 180 days to close those out. You'll engage with that same third-party assessment to then come out and verify that you've done it. And then they'll give you that conditional, or then they'll remove the conditional assessment grade and give you a passing grade. The bullet number 2 there, where your self-assessment closeout, is done by the organization seeking assessment. That's you, right? You're the organization seeking assessment. Once you've engaged with that third party and they're on site, then you're an OSC, an organization seeking certification. It's one of those, if you will, acronyms that came out with the ruling. So if you've got if the C3PAO discovers a problem, it's one of those 1-point controls. It's okay. They'll give you a conditional pass, but you've got 180 days to implement that assessment, re-engage with that third party to come back out again, look at it, and then they'll give you that passing grade, and they'll update your score in EMAS, or update your certification actually in EMAS, that you are compliant. Okay? So I just showed you kind of how to do it manually. I'm now going to show you how Exostar can help you do this and help you manage your overall CMMC program utilizing our Certification Assistant application. It really is that application that allows you to centralize all of that information, including the evidence, any open POAMs you might have, etc., about your overall CMMC program, and kind of keeps you up to date and on track to make sure you meet your CMMC compliance goals. So let me dive into the application. I've got it running here. So this is a SaaS application available from Exostar. You can have one or many different assessments, and the reason you may have other assessments is if you're an organization with multiple cage codes and multiple locations, you may need a different assessment for each of those because your system boundary may be different for each of those organizations. So I'm going to show you kind of one organization. And so when you sign up for this application, you'll start to fill out information about your organization, your system, right? Because all of this is about a particular system and that boundary that you've defined. Then walk you through each of those different practices, those 110 different controls. If we haven't implemented one of those, we're going to create a POAM. As we fill out our implementation of a particular practice, we're going to be able to gather the evidence and centralize all that here in kind of one easy to use tool and information provider for you. So when I first come in, this would obviously all be blank. None of these charts would be generated, etc. You'd first go into the organization info and let us know, kind of about your organization. This is going to be about, who this is, right? So this is Exostar demo. This is our address. This is the system owner, the organization, again, address, contact information, etc. We also have, right, you may have a separate person that's responsible for your CMMC program. That person might be an employee. They might also be from an RPO, right? So they may be an MSP themselves who are helping you out here. Allow you to customize it with your logo. Once you've filled out this information, then you'd move into information about the system itself. And this is where we start to provide that information to the, to everyone about our system boundary. So, this is where, we can name that. What level do we want to be at? What's our purpose here? Are we leveraging any cloud services? So in this case, we're leveraging Exostar's managed Microsoft 365 as an enclave where we store, process, and transmit CUI. We're uploading our network diagram. We're uploading our system boundary diagram. These are simple drag and drop dialogues. So, if I need to replace this file, I simply, create the new, Visio or PowerPoint or whatever I'm building that diagram in, and I drop it in here. Same thing with that data flow diagram. This defines the overall system for me. I link in the leverage systems and give some additional information about it. I may want to also upload things like my list of users or my list of applications that are part of that. And that's typically where you would start to see around the leverage systems. We're then going to dive into the individual practices. Now, this can also be driven from the dashboard. You don't have to walk through it in this way, right? If you wanted to work on a particular practice, I could, this is going to walk me through each one, right? Starting at the first one in that access control domain, it's going to take this, if I click next, it's going to take me to the next control in that access control domain. If I want to jump ahead and work on a particular control that we know we have information for, I can go to the practices here and go to, which one I work on next. So as we start to build out these, right, I'm going to fill out, if you will, an information envelope about each of these individual practices. So I have a new policy and procedure we wrote for insider threat training. So that's 3.2.3. So I can go into, I can find 3.2.3. Here it is. I can dive into that particular control. Hopefully what you just saw there is my current SPRS score or the score I would enter into my SPRS system is 15 for this particular organization. Part of this is obviously we don't, we have some controls that are implemented. We have some controls that are not implemented. So this one I erased before I came in, but I forgot to change it. So let me make that not implemented and take off that. When I now go to my dashboard, this should have reduced my 15 number, right? Because this control is actually worth some points. They all are. And I was at 15 and now I'm at 14. So if I go to 3.2.3, I go back into it, I can now start to populate this for the insider threat awareness. Right? So this is, provide security awareness training for, for my group. We wrote an implementation statement around this. We've divvied it out between each of the different controls. The company we're building this for is called Glory Minerals. And we have a shared responsibility because we use a cloud service that also does things. We also might have an MSP. So when I write these particular policies and procedures, I spell that out to make sure that, people know that, this is what my organization does. This is what my CSP does. This is what my MSP does. So I'm just going to cut and paste this. Format is going to get a little funky here, but I do that. And then this is going to be my implementation statement for this particular control. I can put that I've implemented this, changed it from not implemented. I've uploaded this policy and procedure statement as well as part of the evidence. This is where I would also want to upload the other evidence. So, as part of the threat awareness training, I may have other evidence like a roster of attendees at training. I had asked, one of my shared responsibility matrix, there was an attestation letter from my MSP that their people have done training, and or maybe it was just part of their shared responsibility matrix, or it was part of their body of evidence. Whatever that is, you should upload here into the evidence, because that's going to be one of those things that your certified third-party assessment organization is going to want to validate that you have evidence that you've done these things. So once you have that, you can go ahead and, we've already moved it to implemented. This is really no longer in. It's probably concluded now. And we've now, when we go to our dashboard, this particular control would now be implemented, moved from not implemented, and we got our score back up to 15 from 14. And we're going to go down and go through this for each of those different controls. Now, for some of these controls, we've got some completed, we've got some in progress. So if I go to one of these that hasn't been started yet, as I start to gather information about what I need to do, right, this is going to start to, these instructions tell me about what I need to have for this particular control, including, some examples, assessment considerations, those assessment objectives, determine if statements, etc. So if this control isn't implemented, I can now create the POAM against this, because I want to be able to manage this control to closure. So I can now create a POAM against this particular control, and I can, assign it out to somebody. So, this is sorry, I'm fat fingering everything. Who's going to do this? I've turned to lay out 2 people in here, so I'm going to assign this to myself. It's against this particular practice. So if I wanted to, I could also make this the title. What haven't we done? So I should know what we haven't done yet, but we haven't really started this. This was created obviously today. Are we going to have any milestones or not? Do I want to not name those titles, etc.? So this is going to allow me to manage this. I want to get this done by a particular date, right? This date's already passed, so I don't want to assign it there. So we want to, we got 180 days from 6/11, but we want to get it done a little quicker than that. So I'm going to make it August 1st, 2025. Then when I go to, my dashboard, you can see this has been added to the POAM items. When I go back to that dashboard, I'm going to then have this listed or added to my list of POAMs. It's been assigned out to a particular individual, and we can then start to manage these POAMs to closure. So we want to be able to manage the overall CMMC program. This includes those recurring tasks that are associated with, as part of this, you'll want to review things once a month. You'll want to review that things occurred, etc. Now, you have, as I mentioned before, in this particular case, I've got another assessment because I've got another organization that I work with, right? Or I've got another location in my organization that I also manage things for. So you can have different assessments for different cage codes or other locations you might have that have a different system. If you use a particular baseline of controls across your company, you can create a baseline system security plan. You can download that, so you can import and export that as a particular file type, and then import that to that next assessment, so you can adopt, if you will, those controls from one location to another and get a jump start on that assessment. You don't have to start the whole thing from scratch if you're already doing it across, one of your locations, and you just want to bring those into your other location as well. That'll start to drive the same dashboard. It'll create that new information, etc. So again, just makes it a little easier to manage multiple cage code environments where you have different SSPs for those organizations. All right, so hopefully part of that demonstration, you were able to see that Certification Assistant will help you centrally manage that overall CMMC program. It allows you to gather all of that evidence in one location, allows you to create those implementation statements, or just copy and paste those in, or just link them in as documents that you have. Kind of determine how the best way you want to work. Allow you to manage those individual tasks and those individual POAMs to closure. And then again, just going forward, manage that overall program. Now, this is part of Exostar's CMMC Ready Suite. If you're having a problem with generating those overall policies and procedures for the different 14 control families, Exostar has a companion application called Policy Pro that allows you to take templates of policy statements, customize those to fit your organization, or if you've got existing policies and procedures, maybe you did for a different kind of certification, maybe you did an ISO standard that also asked for some of these procedures to be in place. Either the ones you create in Policy Pro or the ones you bring in from another, standard or guideline, you can run those policies and procedures through an AI engine in Policy Pro, get a score around those and indicators of what you may need to customize those to meet the CMMC program or the NIST 800-171 particular controls. That AI engine uses a thing called key elements not included to give you prompts of what you may need to insert, change, adjust, etc. within that document to improve it overall. If you're looking for an enclave to store, process, or transmit controlled unclassified information, Exostar's managed Microsoft 365 solution might be a fit for you. That is an enclave up in Microsoft's Azure GCC High. built on Microsoft Teams, so it gives you that familiar Teams experience. It is managed and supported by Exostar's tech ops and support teams. It has an Exostar application embedded within it, which puts the guardrails and guidelines within the application to enforce 85 of those 110 controls. Obviously, some of those controls are also done by Exostar tech ops and support teams. You know, the monitoring, the SOC, the NOC capabilities, all those kinds of things are wrapped around the overall solution. If you're looking for a third party to help you along this process or determine where you are today, Exostar has a number of partners and third parties that can do different kinds of CMMC assessments with you. Those include readiness and gap assessments to take a look at where you are today, where your gaps are of where you need to get to CMMC compliance. That partner list also includes C3POs that can either engage with you ahead of time and do a mock assessment to let you know if you're really ready, or you can engage with them to actually do C3PO assessments today, right? Those things are in place and you can start to schedule those. So no matter where you are kind of in your CMMC journey, Exostar can help you along that way. Now, my colleague, I'm going to ask to kick off the poll. I'd appreciate you to take a minute and fill out the poll for us. This allows us to get your feedback on how we did today, how you're doing in your overall CMMC readiness, but also we'll ask you if there are particular topics you'd like to see. We do a number of webinars in any given month that address both our products as well as overall CMMC topics. So we did get some questions ahead of time submitted, so I'm going to take a couple minutes and answer those. So the first one, how to handle updates to the SSP and demonstrate review and approvals. Do you suggest controlling it as a release document or just that it is a living document? So you absolutely should update your SSP as you evolve, as you change, as you close out POAMs. You should absolutely update your SSP to reflect that. If you've changed technologies, you absolutely have to update your SSP and do that. I would always recommend that you treat this as a living document. It should be something, that's, your system security plan should be under version control. You should be able to put in the new things, but also know what you changed from before. There should also be a sign-off process because remember, you've got to annually affirm that you do these things. And part of that review and approval process should be a sign-off from your organization leadership that you've done these things. So number 2, a process that helps generate the SSP while doing the assessment. Well, hopefully you saw that today as part of my certification assistant demonstration. You could do this also, via spreadsheet and the assessment guide and the scoring algorithm, etc. But you absolutely should, generate that SSP as you go along, or, well, actually, your SSP should be part of that assessment because you really can't do an assessment without an SSP because that system security plan is the thing that should have all of the information within it that a third-party assessment organization needs to do that assessment, including links to the evidence that you're gathering to prove that up, to prove that you do that particular thing. The links to the diagrams or the actual diagrams that put in your system boundary and your CUI data flows and those kinds of things. So you absolutely should, have an SSP, and that should be the guiding light of your particular assessment. So number 3, as a subcontractor to a DoD prime contractor, is there anything we can do if they are not labeling drawings as CUI? Well, the only thing you really can do is ask them. So you should be able to go back to them or back to your contracting officer who you're working with as part of that to, say, hey, you sent this over to us. We think it's CUI. It's not marked as such. Is it or is it not? And then let them make that determination to you explicitly. And I would kind of treat it as CUI while you're waiting for that decision or for that thing to be made. Because somebody can always label something as CUI later. They've got, they should inform you, but you want to be careful in these kinds of cases. But the thing you can do is ask them. Number 4, I added this in here because this is one of those roadmap things. Certification Assistant and Policy or Pro are both SaaS applications. Exostar continues to evolve to enhance these things as we go along. So, the question was, I'd like to understand and see how Exostar can create an SSP and other documentation using AI as opposed to templates. As I mentioned, Policy Pro today uses templates. It provides you the templates as an example, and then you customize those. We do have in our roadmap that idea to instead make it more of a question and response thing where you would, the system would ask you questions, you would respond to those, and then it would generate those for you. I don't yet have a time or date or release schedule when that will be available, but it is something in our roadmap. Number 5, this is about Exostar's Enclave. So I added in here because I know a number of our customers are out there with a number of our solutions. So the biggest obstacle right now is defining our current customer onboarding process and defining the new process to leverage Exostar's managed Microsoft 365 Enclave moving forward. Building necessary work instructions as well, defining the date keepers, etc. So you would typically want to start here. So Exostar's managed Microsoft 365, as part of that Exostar application, has 3 roles that it includes as part of the Enclave. One of those is a sponsor administrator. That's the people from your organization who authorize access into the Enclave. So you'll want a process of, this is how we determine or who in our organization are sponsor administrators, who in your organization approves those people to be sponsor administrators, and then how do those people field requests from others in your organization to be added into the Enclave? Is it, it could be an email, right? They email these people, or they email this email group, or if you have a ticketing system, ServiceNow, Jira, anything like that, you could have people request those things there, and then they get access into the system. This is how teams are set up, and then so that's how you go about defining those particular steps to do that. So hopefully everybody, that gave you a good feel of Exostar's Certification Assistant, gave you a good understanding of how to do that self-assessment and score yourself, and why you might want to leverage something like Certification Assistant to ease that burden for you. So I want to thank everybody for your time and attention today. Hopefully you found this valuable. We have a number of these sessions every month, as I mentioned before. Our next session is next week. It's our general monthly CMMC webinar. It's with our partner RSM, and we're going to talk about supply chain risk and how to validate or ensure that your supply chain is also meeting those CMMC requirements that you may be flowing down to them as part of your DFARS contracts. So thanks again, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the week.